Here today, we really need to unpack the psychology at play and confront the truth behind the question, why psychology says Christmas is the loneliest time of year.
It is truly one of the most fascinating and I think painful paradoxes of modern life. Because for a significant and often very silent number of people, December actually ushers in this wave of dread.
Yeah.
It spikes anxiety, depression, and I think above all else, this profound loneliness. The whole season of forced cheer or what you could call performative happiness, it just replaces genuine connection with feelings of acute misery.
Exactly. And our goal today is to move way beyond that superficial idea of just having the holiday blues.
Right.
We're going to unpack what the data actually reveals about this. It's a complex, quantifiable psychological experience. We want to look at the core mechanisms driving it, the intense social comparisons, the crushing weight of unrealistic expectations, both self-imposed and external.
And the obligation.
And the sheer feeling of obligation that just dominates the entire month. We really want to arm you with the mental toolkit you need to navigate the reality of the season.
Because that reality, for so many, looks very different from the holiday commercial version.
Very different.
Let's start right there then with the reality. I think we need to ground this conversation in the actual numbers because the scale of this experience it's exponentially larger than many people realize.
It really is.
We are not talking about a small, isolated pocket of people here. We are talking about, in some cases, a majority reporting deep emotional distress.
The statistics are undeniably compelling, and they absolutely solidify the scope of this. I mean, a comprehensive Lifestance health survey of U.S. adults recently dropped a figure that should honestly stop all of us in our tracks.
Okay.
51% of respondents report feeling lonely around the holidays.
Wow. 51. So
yeah.
Half the population.
Half. But here is the critical psychological caveat, the absolute kicker in that data. That 51% includes people who are actively with their loved ones.
Wait, really? So this isn't just about physical isolation or, being alone in your apartment?
Not at all. It's about a painful emotional isolation that's felt acutely in a crowded room, surrounded by family or friends.
That statistic is incredibly jarring. It suggests that loneliness during the holidays is, ironically, a widely shared collective experience.
It is.
So you might feel like you're the only one around the dinner table feeling it, when statistically, half the people there could be going through the exact same feeling of disconnection.
And this isn't geographically specific either. The phenomenon is pervasive across westernized cultures that share this hyper-commercialized, expectation-heavy holiday structure.
I was going to ask about that.
A study by the Canadian Mental Health Association showed that more than half of Canadians also report feeling significant levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness during the season. It's a deep cultural, psychological thing that's woven into the very structure of these winter holidays.
And we know this feeling of isolation isn't experienced equally by everyone. Right? For some people, the whole holiday environment acts as a kind of intense amplifier for feelings that are already there.
That amplification effect is incredibly powerful. If you already feel like you stand outside the general social momentum.
What would that look like? Like if you're an introvert?
Exactly. Maybe you identify as an introvert, or you're single in a heavily couple-focused family, or you struggle with social anxiety year-round. So when the world's narrative suddenly shifts to hyper-focus on universal togetherness and perfect families.
It's just a constant reminder.
It's a constant reminder. And simply witnessing that pressure severely amplifies your own personal sense of isolation. It can feel like you failed some kind of cultural requirement.
It's that constant, unavoidable exposure to the idealized version of what you should be feeling, what your family should look like, and what your life should contain. It forces that existing loneliness to feel not just present, but like a deeply personal failure.
And we have to recognize that this holiday loneliness is crashing into a pre-existing condition, if you will.
Right, the loneliness epidemic.
The epidemic nature of loneliness that's already sweeping society. The data has been shouting about this for years.
Especially regarding younger adults.
Precisely. A CNA study showed this is particularly impacting Generation ZSO, those emerging adults, say, 18 to 22. They are already disproportionately affected by loneliness, reporting higher rates than older generations.
So what happens when they hit the holidays?
Well, they face this compounding isolation. They might be separated from their university friend networks, the support system they've built.
And they're forced back into maybe stressful family dynamics.
Exactly. High-pressure family dynamics that they might have spent the last 9 months trying to escape. So that isolation just compounds sharply and quickly.
Okay, let's pivot from that deep loneliness to the sheer unavoidable stress of the season. Because even if you feel socially connected, the logistical and emotional load is immense.
It is.
57% of U.S. respondents said they found the holiday season stressful. And we all recognize that, right? The traffic, the shopping, the planning. But the major finding here, I think, relates to the tyranny of obligation.
That is the real drain on our emotional reserves. I mean, when researchers asked about holiday gatherings, they found a shocking level of dissonance.
Okay.
75% of respondents said that at least a few of their planned holiday gatherings feel more like an obligation than something they genuinely want to attend.
3 out of 4 people.
3 out of 4. They're showing up because duty, not desire, is dictating their schedule.
So 3 out of 4 people around the table would genuinely rather be somewhere else? I mean, that profoundly alters the entire energy and authenticity of the month, doesn't it?
It has to.
It forces this emotional labor, the labor of pretending to be engaged, happy, grateful, when your internal monologue is just screaming, I need this to be over.
And that strain is highest among the young. When you dissect who wants to skip these gatherings, it's millennials at 34% and Gen Z at 33%. They're the age groups most likely to prefer skipping most or all of their events.
And Gen Z in particular.
Crucially, Gen Z is leading the charge in viewing these gatherings as obligatory. A staggering 89% of them reported that feeling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. They often have less perceived control over their social schedule. They might be balancing high expectations from older generations with their own, often less traditional social circles.
It becomes this ultimate intersection of high expectations and maybe a low tolerance for strained relationships.
So it leads to that really difficult decision. Do I stay in my apartment alone and choose one type of misery, or do I go home and manage the emotional conflicts for a totally different type of miserable experience?
And to really understand this landscape, we have to recognize that loneliness isn't static. It changes across our lifespan.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Yeah, groundbreaking studies suggest we experience these statistically significant increases in loneliness during 3 specific transitional periods. Our late 20s, our mid-50s, and our late 80s.
That is fascinating data. So psychologically, what is it about those 3 highly specific age bands that makes them so uniquely prone to isolation, especially when the holidays roll around?
Well, they're all massive periods of psychosocial transition where your identity and your life structure are actively being destabilized.
Okay, so break that down. Let's start with the late 20s.
Think about the late 20s. This is that move from emerging adulthood to settled adulthood. Your friend groups scatter because of marriages, career moves, starting families.
Right, the intense social network from college just kind of dissolves.
It dissipates, and it often leaves a void. You might be single while everyone else is pairing up, or you're struggling financially while your friends are buying houses. The holiday demand for established, stable family connection hits right when your own personal life structure is at its most volatile.
So you're navigating this intense identity shift while simultaneously being told by every commercial that you should already be settled and celebrating your stable life.
Exactly. Then look at the mid-50s. This is often the peak period for facing the empty nest, combined with potential career plateaus, or maybe the realization of unachieved goals.
A moment of profound reflection.
It is. On purpose and meaning, people start facing physical decline in their parents or losing peers, which shifts them into what we might call elderhood awareness. The holiday emphasizes the family unit, but for the person in their mid-50s, that unit has just fundamentally changed, often leaving them questioning their role and purpose within it.
And the late 80s seems sadly predictable, though no less painful.
That's driven by external factors colliding with severe physical limitations. It often means increased functional and social isolation due to physical decline, mobility issues, and tragically the heavy loss of peers and lifetime partners.
And the holidays themselves just highlight that.
They do. They require mobility, travel, complex hosting. They often highlight everything that the person can no longer physically do, which just intensifies that sense of being sidelined or alone.
So the key takeaway here is that if someone is already in one of those 3 life stages, the external pressures of the holidays, which are all about stability and connection, they don't just exist alongside their life, they collide violently with an interior landscape that is already shifting and unstable.
Precisely, which dramatically heightens that experience of isolation and distress. The holiday expectations act as a forceful exacerbation of a pre-existing significant internal vulnerability.
That transition takes us perfectly into the internal battles we all face. If external circumstances are amplifying stress, what are the internal mechanisms we deploy that can turn potential joy into deep dread? Let's start with the immense, overwhelming pressure to perform happiness.
This phenomenon, what we call performative happiness, is intrinsically tied to the curated reality of social media.
Although the pressure to be happy for the kids or for appearances existed long before Instagram.
Oh, absolutely. But the survey data reveals how universal this is now. 69% of respondents feel at least a little pressure to appear happier than they actually are during the holidays.
59%.
They feel forced to put on a show for the benefit of others, or maybe even for their own camera roll.
And once again, that burden is felt most acutely by the younger generations, the digital natives.
Absolutely. Millennials at 34% and Gen Z at 35% are reporting the highest degree of pressure to perform this happiness. And just think about the emotional cost of maintaining that facade.
It must be exhausting.
If you are feeling deeply isolated, lonely, or grieving, the effort required to produce a dazzling, socially acceptable version of holiday joy is just exhausting.
It creates this powerful self-defeating cycle, doesn't it? You feel lonely, you feel obligated, and then you feel you have to hide those genuine feelings with an almost blinding public facade of joy.
Which just deepens the internal sense of isolation.
Because you know you're deceiving everyone around you. The public performance guarantees the private pain.
Which brings us directly to one of the most powerful silent drivers of holiday distress, self-imposed pressure.
The stress we generate for ourselves.
Exactly. What does this look like psychologically, especially in December?
Well, self-imposed pressure is basically the internal stress and anxiety we generate by setting unrealistic, often unattainable expectations for ourselves. It stems from these internal beliefs about what a good parent or a successful host or a beloved family member should achieve.
That word again, should.
It's the stress that comes from the gap between the achievable reality and the idealized fantasy.
And this internal pressure doesn't just make us stressed. It generates specific psychological patterns that become turbocharged during the holiday environment. The first is perfectionism.
The relentless, rigid belief that tasks, gifts, gatherings, even the atmosphere itself has to be absolutely flawless.
And this perfectionism means there is zero tolerance for deviation.
Exactly.
This leads to a dangerously low tolerance for mistakes. So if you burn the cookies, the internal reaction isn't, oh, well, that's just life. It's, I failed the holiday or I ruined Christmas.
Right.
Perfectionism strips away the enjoyment because the focus shifts from connection to outcome. You aren't hosting a party, you are undergoing a performance review.
And the second pattern is the inevitable follow-up to that, self-criticism.
This is that persistent internal voice that harshly evaluates every single effort and achievement. If the gathering isn't up to that impossible internal standard, the self-criticism lands instantly. You failed, you didn't budget enough, you didn't try hard enough.
You are inadequate.
That voice is relentless and incredibly isolating.
Which culminates in the third pattern, this paralyzing fear of failure.
That deep-seated concern about not meeting your own internal standards leads to profound behavioral changes. It can manifest as avoidance, refusing to host or attend events simply to preempt the anticipated failure.
Or outright self-sabotage.
Or outright self-sabotaging behaviors, which sometimes happen subconsciously just to get the failure over with quickly. And when you look at those glossy, idealized representations of success and happiness plastered all over social media, it just acts as external reinforcement. It intensifies this internal pressure, making your inadequacy feel objective and inescapable.
Speaking of immense pressure, we absolutely have to discuss the financial weight of the season. Let's spend some time on this concept of money wounds.
This is such a vital conversation point, especially since 76% of Americans report experiencing money wounds during the holidays.
76%.
Yeah. And money wounds aren't just about debt. They're the emotional and psychological scars shaped by past financial beliefs or traumatic poverty or these deeply ingrained shaming messages about wealth or scarcity.
And the holidays just force them to the surface.
Intensely. With their strict mandate to spend on gifts, travel, and lavish food, they just force those deep old wounds to open up.
And you mentioned the core emotional distortion is tying self-worth directly to financial status. Can we elaborate on the shame narratives that spring from that?
The thought pattern is so insidious and toxic because it personalizes the financial struggle. The shame narrative says, A good parent or sibling should be able to afford the best gifts.
Right.
Or, if I don't spend enough on this party, I'm failing as a provider and therefore I'm failing as a family member. It elevates transactional spending to a measure of inherent human value and love. The fear of being judged as cheap or inadequate or careless just fuels the anxiety and drives unnecessary overspending.
That makes perfect sense. The financial pressure hits a crescendo right when we're supposed to be celebrating unconditional love.
And here is the key insight from a psychological perspective. Shame thrives on isolation and secrecy.
We don't talk about money troubles.
Exactly. By acknowledging that this struggle is shared and that your actual self-worth is not measured by the cost of the gifts you exchange, we can begin the process of healing those wounds and reducing that debilitating anxiety.
Now, moving to what is perhaps the most intensely difficult emotional battleground, grief. The holidays are fundamentally focused on coming together, and by definition, that focus on togetherness starkly emphasizes the people who are missing.
For those navigating loss, whether it's recent or years old, the pervasive, ubiquitous mood of forced festivity creates a painful, profound dissonance. It feels like the world is demanding celebration when your heart is broken.
It must be so isolating.
Grief counselors, like those from Palliative Care Australia, they emphasize the absolute normalcy of this. It is common and it is reasonable to experience an overwhelming and mixed range of emotions when you're grieving during the holidays. Anxiety, stress, profound sadness, regret, even anger. Anger at the lack of sensitivity the season seems to show.
Exactly.
I think it's so crucial for anyone listening to give themselves permission for those mixed emotions. You might feel a moment of genuine joy or laughter, and then it's followed instantly by this wave of profound sadness. That back and forth swing is the definition of normal grieving.
Exactly. The psychological advice here is centered entirely on acceptance and permission. Accept that your grief is normal and reasonable, and that the holidays will inevitably make it sharper.
So acknowledge those you've lost.
Acknowledge them. Maybe talk about them, share a cherished memory, continue a small tradition they loved, or just light a candle for them. But the most important piece of advice is granting yourself permission to opt out. If you are struggling, forcing yourself to join celebratory events out of a sense of duty is not required for your emotional health. It is completely okay to say no, to take time for yourself, or to leave early without explanation.
That feels like such a necessary validation. Permission to prioritize self-preservation over obligation. Absolutely. The need for emotional self-preservation far outweighs the social obligation to appear cheerful for one season.
This next section is where the clinical data provides a really stunning, counterintuitive contrast to the narrative we see played out in popular media.
Right.
We hear constantly about the Christmas surge of crises, this idea that all this pressure and grief and financial stress boils over on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day itself, leading to overwhelmed emergency rooms.
That narrative is so deeply ingrained in our cultural consciousness, and it has a historical basis, dating back to classical psychoanalytical literature from the mid-20th century with titles like Negative Reactions to Christmas and descriptions of the holiday syndrome.
And the media just runs with it.
The popular media certainly sustains this myth. It often focuses disproportionately on the 26% of people who report an adverse effect on mental health while ignoring everyone else. But modern systematic research on population-level hospital utilization completely challenges this assumption.
Okay, let's go directly to the findings of that systematic review on psychiatric hospitalizations and emergencies. What does the hard, cold data show about Christmas Day itself?
The findings are not just counterintuitive. They're remarkably consistent across multiple international studies spanning decades of data. The research shows there is absolutely no evidence for increased utilization of emergency psychiatric services around Christmas.
No evidence.
In fact, it's the exact opposite trend. Hospitalizations, including suicide, suicide attempts, and self-harm incidents, are consistently and significantly lower during the core Christmas period, which researchers define as December 24th through the 26th.
Lower, compared to the rest of the year.
Lower compared to the rest of the year.
That is a truly seismic shift from the perceived reality. It means that the most intense time of expected emotional turmoil is actually the quietest time clinically.
It is.
Can you give us a sense of just how much lower these numbers actually are?
Certainly. One highly detailed analysis of psychiatric emergency admissions showed that the daily admission numbers were a remarkable 24.7% lower on Christmas days compared to non-holiday days.
Wow.
Furthermore, when you look at monthly trends, December generally shows the lowest average daily hospitalization rates overall. There is this consistent window, roughly from December 23rd to the 26th, that reflects constantly low average admission numbers across the board.
Okay, so if the crisis isn't happening during the holiday, when does it happen?
Yeah.
This points directly to that moment of post-holiday crash, which researchers call the rebound effect.
That is the most crucial clinical finding for our listeners to understand. The data consistently shows an immediate and significant increase in psychiatric emergencies, suicide, and self-harm on New Year's Day, January 1st.
Immediately after.
And crucially, in the period immediately following the dissolution of the holiday structure. We shift from the lowest rate in December to data showing January becomes the month with the highest recourse to psychiatric emergency services.
So why does this happen? What psychological factor is protecting us during Christmas, only to let go so violently in January?
Psychologists widely suggest that the holidays may offer what they term a protective holiday effect.
A protective effect.
This protective layer could be driven by several key factors. Firstly, increased social contact, even if it's obligatory, provides a temporary social scaffolding. People are less likely to be physically isolated. Secondly, there's often the ready availability of family and friends. Even strained relationships provide a network of monitoring or immediate intervention.
So even just having people nearby, even if you're not talking deeply, offers a structural safety net.
Precisely. And the third factor is the temporary structure and necessary distraction that the season provides. People may simply defer a crisis until after the holiday passes.
It's that internalized mentality of, I just need to get through Christmas.
I just need to get through. I can't ruin this for the kids, for the family.
The intense obligation to perform cheer acts as a psychological deferral mechanism for underlying chronic issues. And when that deferral period ends abruptly, when the social scaffolding is dismantled, the travel is over, and that protective structure dissolves, the weight of those deferred issues returns with full force.
The crisis rebounds. January becomes the month of highest utilization. Researchers sometimes refer to this spike as the end of holiday derangement. The immense psychological pressure to perform wanes, the social contact disappears, and the individual returns to their routine isolation, facing all the same issues they had pre-December.
Only now they're compounded by financial stress and the emotional letdown of the season being over.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate deflation.
It is.
Understanding this rebound effect fundamentally changes how we should approach the period between December 26th and, say, January 15th. That's the time we need these coping tools the most. Since we know the stress and loneliness are pervasive in December and the clinical danger zone is January, we absolutely need to focus on building resilience. We need robust, actionable tools for navigating the mental and emotional battles we just discussed. So let's start with one of the most powerful internal resilience tools that just flies in the face of our self-critical culture, the power of self-compassion.
Self-compassion, as it's defined by researchers like Dr. Kristen Neff, is fundamentally about responding to yourself with the same kindness, the same warmth and understanding you would naturally offer a good friend.
When they're having a hard time.
When they're experiencing failure, difficulty, or suffering. It's about replacing that harsh internal critic with an internal supporter.
And as we touched on earlier, this isn't just a fluffy concept, right? It challenges that deeply ingrained beliefs many of us hold, that self-criticism is necessary to drive motivation and success.
That is the core myth we have to debunk. Self-compassion is not self-pity. It is not weakness or laziness or making excuses.
Okay.
Research consistently shows it's actually a powerful, sustainable source of coping and psychological resilience. And crucially, it doesn't undermine motivation. It drives motivation from a place of desiring health and well-being, rather than from that fearful, debilitating place of avoiding self-criticism.
That's a huge distinction.
And what's more, self-compassionate people actually take greater personal responsibility for their actions. They're more likely to apologize for mistakes because they have the internal safety net to admit those mistakes without collapsing under shame.
So if I can treat myself kindly, admitting I burned the pie or forgot to send the card becomes a quick learning opportunity rather than an existential crisis.
Precisely. The practical application is so simple but profound. Use the self-compassion exercise logic. Ask yourself how you treat a struggling friend. What tone do you use? The comforting words you say, the empathy you offer. Now, compare that to how you treat yourself when you struggle with perfectionism or loneliness or guilt. Then, make a conscious, intentional decision to shift your internal tone and language to match the kind, supportive words you'd offer that cherished friend. That is the foundation of building sustainable resilience against holiday stress.
Building on that internal strength, the research on loneliness and life transitions also introduce a fascinating concept, the wisdom remedy.
That study found a clear inverse relationship between chronic loneliness and cultivated wisdom.
Meaning the more wisdom you cultivate.
The more loneliness diminishes. And importantly, wisdom isn't just theoretical knowledge. It's measured by practical traits that you can actively work on.
Like what?
Like strong emotional regulation, demonstrated empathy, active compassion, deep insight into your own experiences, acceptance of reality, and effective decisiveness.
So the remedy isn't about forcing yourself into more social situations. It's about refining your internal operating system to better handle those situations in the solitude that might follow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The wisdom remedy encourages the acceptance that the holidays might always be tough, given their inherent expectations.
Right, you can't change that.
You can't. So you focus your energy on being compassionate and gentle with yourself through the process. You gain acceptance that you can't just wish loneliness away, but you can profoundly manage your internal reaction to it by controlling your perspective and your emotional response.
Okay, next, let's tackle the tyranny of obligation. That crushing 75% feeling of duty with concrete strategies around boundaries and intentionality. How do we reclaim control over our schedule?
Planning ahead is the key to managing that feeling of being dragged through December. The goal is intentionality.
So take an inventory.
Take an inventory right now of every single obligation you feel you must attend or host. Socializing frequency, gift budgets, travel requirements. Decide what truly aligns with your core values and what exists purely as an inherited draining duty.
And for the people trying to balance the end-of-the-year work crunch with mounting family demands, how do we establish clear work-life boundaries to prevent that total mental intrusion?
You need to employ specific psychological rituals to mentally shift out of your high-stress work persona. You can't just stop thinking about work. You have to prime your brain for a new state.
Okay, so what does that look like?
First, execute the basic closeout. Tidy your work area, write down tasks for the next day, and most importantly, completely silence work notifications across all your devices.
But the ritual is what truly signals the brain to switch gears, isn't it?
Yes. The ritual creates a cognitive break. This could be passing a specific landmark on your commute and saying aloud, "I'm leaving work behind now," or physically changing your shoes and washing your hands and telling yourself, "I am entering family time."
That physical act, tied to a clear intention.
It segments your mental life. You also have to change your environment and behavior. Put on comfortable clothes. Immediately engage in a non-work, joy-giving activity like cooking or playing music or taking a short walk. These steps create the necessary psychological distance from work thoughts, helping you rest and recharge authentically.
Pivoting back to financial stress, which we said affects 3/4 of Americans, how do we apply intentionality to manage those painful money wounds?
Again, the first and most difficult step is reflection. We need to deconstruct the emotional narrative around our holiday spending.
So you have to ask yourself some hard questions.
You have to. What family or cultural influences shape my spending decisions? Is this purchase truly about the recipient, or is it trying to fill an emotional void or quiet a critic inside me? This moves you from reactive emotional spending driven by shame to mindful, intentional choices that respect your budget.
Recognizing that the urge to buy the most expensive, perfect gift might actually be driven by guilt or anxiety about not measuring up.
Exactly. To counter that powerful impulsive behavior, implement a strict cooling off period for non-essential holiday purchases.
Like a 24-hour rule.
Put the item in the online cart or photograph it in the store and promise yourself you will wait 24 to 48 hours before purchasing. This delay allows clarity to set in and helps you check if the purchase truly aligns with your financial goals and values rather than just reacting to emotional pressure.
And the most important part.
Recognize and internalize that spending money is not a sustainable solution to anxiety or sadness. When you feel that urge, identify the underlying emotional trigger. Is it loneliness, boredom, guilt? And replace the impulsive shopping with alternative joy-giving activities like hobbies, exercise, or genuine non-monetary self-care.
Finally, let's return to loneliness and the human need for connection and belonging. The standard advice is always just surround yourself with friends, but we know that fails catastrophically when friends are busy or traveling or immersed in their own obligations.
It's terrible advice sometimes.
So what are the practical psychological alternatives to fostering authentic connection when traditional avenues are blocked?
The human need to belong is deep and non-negotiable, but the connection has to be high quality and authentic, especially during a time of performative joy.
So what are the alternatives?
Since traditional avenues might be blocked, look for alternatives that boost your sense of purpose. Volunteer work is often cited as excellent. It forces you into connection, it reduces depression risk, boosts your sense of purpose, and opens opportunities for new social connections focused on a shared mission, not a shared history.
And for those who might struggle with the energy required for in-person volunteering, what are the lower stakes options?
Virtual socialization is a valid, often overlooked option. Actively engage in online communities related to your genuine interests or attend virtual events, especially when weather or travel is a barrier. But more importantly, I think we should focus on getting with people who get you.
That's a profound shift in mindset. Move away from seeking universal acceptance.
Yes. Instead of expending massive energy-seeking universal connection, which often leads to disappointment, identify the specific people who welcome you and support your authentic self, flaws and all, without demanding a performance.
And intentionally cultivate those relationships.
Exactly. And never forget that self-care is a prerequisite for belonging. You have to take sufficient time to discover your own interests and what qualities in others truly bring out the best in you. You need to connect deeply with yourself before you can authentically connect with others.
To wrap up our strategies, we should address holistic wellness for this challenging winter season. Things that go beyond pure therapeutic techniques.
Absolutely. Holistic wellness bolsters internal resilience. Limiting social media use is non-negotiable during this time. The comparison trap severely exacerbates existing isolation and low mood.
It's just fuel on the fire.
It is. Focus intensely on physical wellness. Try to get outside every day, even briefly. Sunlight exposure, even minimal, is crucial for better mood regulation, immunity, and sleep quality. Prioritize sleep. Aim for a consistent 7 to 8 hours. Our bodies are naturally drawn to more rest in the colder, darker months, and sleep deprivation makes every emotional challenge feel exponentially worse.
And hydration.
And maintain hydration. Central heating and dry winter air can physically mimic feelings of fatigue and low mood.
And finally, as a core mindfulness technique for navigating those sudden emotional shifts, let's go deep into the acronym RAIN. It's a superb tool for processing uncomfortable thoughts and emotions non-judgmentally.
RAIN is a powerful, structured approach to mindful self-compassion. When an uncomfortable thought or feeling arises, like a sudden pang of loneliness or guilt, you engage the 4 steps. First are recognize. Name the feeling. Say, I am feeling loneliness, or this is anxiety.
Just identify it.
Second, allow. Let the feeling be there without judgment. Tell yourself, this is how I feel right now, and that is okay. Third, I investigate. Approach the feeling with gentle curiosity. Where is this feeling coming from? How is it experienced physically in my body? Don't try to fix it, just examine it.
And the final step, nurture.
Yes, nurture. This is where self-compassion comes in. Offer yourself the comforting, kind, or supportive message you would instantly offer a struggling friend. Maybe it's, this is really hard right now, but I am here for myself, or you are not alone in this suffering. You gently nurture the experience until you feel a noticeable shift toward calm and centeredness. RAIN turns a moment of panic into a moment of self-connection.
This has been such a powerful exploration, pulling back the curtain on the expected joy of Christmas to reveal the actual complex psychological landscape. To quickly summarize our core insights for you, the feeling of loneliness is massive, affecting 51% even when they're physically with loved ones. The pressure to perform happiness and manage obligations is intense and highest among the young. But the most vital clinical finding is the reality that the major crisis isn't Christmas Day. It's the immediate, brutal January rebound.
That rebound effect, the sudden loss of the social protective layer, is truly the hidden danger zone we have to prepare for.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to carry forward, not just through December, but into the new year. We know the protective effect of the holidays wanes dramatically, leading to a peak in psychiatric emergencies in January. Instead of viewing January 1st as simply a harsh starting line for punishing New Year's resolutions.
Which are often rooted in the exact self-criticism we just talked about.
Exactly. What if we consciously use the resilience and self-care strategies we detailed today, self-compassion, boundaries, intentionality, and RAIN, as tools to sustain emotional balance and structure long past December 26th?
What if we actively mitigated the inevitable January crash by deliberately extending that kindness, that structure, and that awareness into the new year? It's about building a sustainable, long-term plan for emotional wellness, not just surviving the 31 days of December.
Embrace your most essential connection, the one with yourself. Treat yourself with the same profound kindness and acceptance you would extend to your most cherished friend. It is absolutely okay if the holidays are tough. You have built the tools you need to navigate this, and you will make it through again.